pass by. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining me here today as we talk about the deficit reduction plan that was submitted by my office to the legislature today. We are joined by Kendra Schmidt from Deaf Access Services, who will provide the American Sign Language, as well as Ben Swanenkamp, our Deputy Budget Director. And I want to give a shout out to Robert Keating, our Budget Director, who is at home recuperating after an unexpected emergency surgery of approximately 2 weeks ago, which means all this work that we've put in, including through him working at home, has been very, very tireless, and I appreciate his good work as well as the staff in the budget office. Today, I submitted to the legislature a plan to address the projected $138 million budget deficit for Erie County due to the COVID-19 crisis. We originally projected a $220 million deficit resulting from the loss of revenue from the shutdown of businesses due to the COVID-19 outbreak. However, our current projection is lower than originally forecast due to better than expected sales tax proceeds during the months of April and May, and ending the first quarter of the year in a surplus. Though sales tax proceeds were better than our original deficit projections, they are still 20% plus lower than what we expected to receive when we prepared the budget last year. I thank county department heads and elected officials for working with my budget office to propose a reasonable plan that addresses the significant fiscal stress we face. I also thank the legislature for understanding the serious situation facing us and working with my administration to ensure a poorly constructed plan was not rushed out, and that would have benefited no one. Additionally, I thank our budget office for its great work under very trying circumstances to prepare a reasonable plan. Gap closing measures included in the plan include using $29 million of funds that were carried over from 2019, a fund balance usage of $25.15 million, which will take us down to the charter mandated 5% level, the closeout of various capital funds and projects that will allow $4.6 million to be utilized to offset the deficit, savings in our fringe benefit line of $8 million, unanticipated healthcare savings and rebates totaling $16 million, which includes projected health insurance savings of $10 million due to the lack of our employees using healthcare during the period of the COVID crisis. The shifting of $15 million of CARES Act funding that we now know we can use to offset costs associated with the COVID-19 outbreak using existing county personnel, and departmental cuts in excess of $40 million. Every department and office submitted proposed cuts, and all were offered the opportunity to restructure their departments. Some did. Included in this proposal is a major restructuring of the Sheriff's Jail Management Division, which effectively closes the downtown holding center and transfers holding center detainees to the county's jail in Alden. My office supports this proposal, which addresses not only financial issues, but other concerns related to the holding center. Our county's $130 million deficit highlights why state and local governments need federal assistance. Erie County's finances were strong before the COVID-19 outbreak. Our credit rating was the highest it had been in nearly 20 years. We managed our budget well. We now need the federal government's help to ensure continuity of services and avoid needless staff cuts. That is why I call on President Trump to work with leadership in the United States House of Representatives and Senate to pass an additional COVID-19 stimulus package to address the tremendous revenue losses facing state and local governments. If they do so, we can avoid the many cuts to services and layoffs to staffs proposed. If not, the legislature and I will be forced to implement a deficit reduction plan that none of us truly wants to see come to fruition. We can avoid future layoffs if the federal government comes and assists us, as they've been working in the House and the Senate, to get a plan done. Because this affects not just Erie County, but every other government in our region. Every local government relies on sales tax from Erie County, including the cities, the towns, the villages, and the school districts. And the proposal in the House of Representatives, the HEROES Act. So please, Washington, D.C., this is not a Democratic or Republican issue. This is an American issue that is affecting every county, every city, every town, every village, and school districts across the United States, including the 50 states. So please, come together for the betterment of our country. Our country, it would be really good to see individuals in Washington coming together to address a serious concern for our entire country. With that, I'll entertain your questions. That would all still be worked on. It is a plan that was a proposal that was submitted by the Sheriff's Office. Of course, there are significant concerns that would have to be addressed, including moving of staff to the Alden facility. They do not propose cutting every deputy at the holding center, but there would be issues that have to be addressed, especially considering there are two unions. One that CSCA blue collar that represents the individuals at the holding center, and the Teamsters that represent the individuals that are the officers, deputies at the correctional facility. Excuse me, the holding center. Blue collar, CSCA blue collar represents the correctional facility. The Teamsters represent the holding center, and that would all be subject to further discussion. But there is not a plan to eliminate all of those deputies. The vast majority of them are vacancy cuts, but there are some cuts proposed in that line as well as others that would cut actual individuals. There would be layoffs. Sandra.
Can you talk about any other county programs that people come to rely on that are in jeopardy as a result of this plan?
The goal was to try to eliminate, the goal was to not cut as many programs as potentially possible. So there may be service cuts in other programs, but the goal is to keep all programs operational. We've had some questions with regards to arts and cultural institutions. Our plan is to meet the obligation that we set forth in the 2020 budget so that they are not needlessly cut. However, while we would not harm them and cut them in the 2020 budget, if we do not get assistance, we would have to seriously consider cuts to arts and cultural, human service agencies of the like for 2021. Our cash position is okay, and we're anticipating closing our revenue anticipation note through the Comptroller's office by the end of June. I'm not worried so much on the cash position. If we didn't close a revenue anticipation note, then yes, later in the year, in October or September, we would start running thin on cash. We're fine with cash right now, but we have a projected revenue anticipation note that I'm hoping will be closed by the end of June. That is correct, Ben?
Correct.
Yeah. So end of June is when we'd be looking at closing the revenue anticipation note, which would give us the sufficient funds we need for the remainder of the year. But we have to, the revenue anticipation note is based on also finishing with a balanced budget, so I can't just take money and spend it that I don't have because I've got to repay it. So we would, if we do not get federal assistance, we're going to have to implement this proposal in some form. It goes over to the legislature now. I should have said that. The proposal goes over to the legislature now, and they have a certain time period in which they can review it. They can act on it. They could do nothing. They could reject it. I've spoken to the chairwoman about it. She questioned me on the proposals. They are going to have hearings in the next week, I believe, to review the proposal. I'm hopeful that they do the right thing and it, not because I think it is something I really want to implement, but because we have no choice. And that's why we are all calling on our federal government to come in and pass a fourth round of stimulus, so to speak, to address the significant shortfalls. Potentially, yes. The proposal of the HEROES Act would give us more than that. It would actually cover our shortfall this year and address what is a projected shortfall for 2021 and potentially a portion for 2022. If the HEROES Act in its current form passed the Senate and was signed into law by the President, we would not have to enact anything here. We'd have to take a look at our future to ensure that we're not spending beyond our means, but if the HEROES Act was passed, the cuts that were proposed would not have to be implemented. It's over $300 million. Sandra?
Assuming that not all of that money comes through, that we get some of it, can you talk a little bit about in what order you would be making distributions to the county budget?
Well, the goal would be to first eliminate all the job cuts. We don't want to lay anybody off if we can avoid it. We are anticipating, I said, using $25 million of fund balance. We would use fund balance as necessary, but we don't want to spend down as much fund balance. We may need that in future years. The $29 million that is set aside for COVID relief, we would use that first. We would take the actions that we have with regards to healthcare premiums, the savings, the $10 million we have in our healthcare costs. We would move that. That would be like number 2. So there's a projection of order, a pecking order, that we would utilize first and try to let the cuts be the last thing possible. And if we certainly have federal assistance come in, we would use that money to avoid the significant cuts.
It sounds like this money, this plan to restructure a holding center and correction facility is something that the sheriff's district is definitely implement going forward, or is that only contingent on
The sheriff's plan with regards to restructuring of its jail management division, including closing the holding center, is something I believe they've been working on for some time. They had previously discussed that it was a proposal that they might introduce in the 2021 budget. And I want to read you some numbers to show why this would make sense. The Erie County Holding Center has a capacity of 300 people. The Erie County Holding Center has a capacity of 638 people. Currently has 300 individuals there, or they are running at 47% capacity. The Erie County Correctional Facility has a capacity of 744 people, and they are running at 223 individuals currently, or at a capacity of 30%. Our total capacity in Erie County between the two facilities is 1,382. We are at a total amount of detainees, inmates at 523, or only 38% capacity. So we are running at less than 40% capacity of all our facilities. And if we merge the two into the correctional facility, we will still be approximately 25% below capacity for that facility. There's been tremendous reduction in the amount of detainees and inmates at the two facilities as a result of bail reform and the early releasing of individuals pursuant to the work of District Attorney John Flynn. So we have tremendous capacity right now. We actually have excess capacity at both facilities. And I know the sheriffs are looking at this as a long-term plan. I don't believe they want to lay off anybody. They eventually want to reduce staff by attrition. There will be some layoffs attributable to this as a result of the merger of the two facilities into one. Can you repeat that, Mike, a little louder? I can't hear you with the mask on. The question was, do I expect them that they would use the television system at the correctional facility that was implemented years ago but really hasn't been used? And would there be shuttling of buses between Alden and downtown? There certainly would be shuttling of individuals between Alden and downtown. It happens every day. For those who don't know, there are individuals who are shuttled downtown every day from the Alden Correctional Facility for release, because all release is done in downtown Buffalo, or for court appointments. That wouldn't change. The television system, I really can't talk about the particulars associated with that. You'd have to talk to the sheriff's office. They are a separate, independently elected official. There's a lot of folks out there who are We have a budget that's proposed by the sheriff's office. We propose our own budget, goes to the legislature, and then once the legislature approves its budget, the sheriff can approve, make changes with legislative approval during the year. I don't have the ability to just reduce their funding during the mid-budget year, and I'm never going to reduce funding to a point where we create a issue with the safety and security of our citizens in our county. The question was, are we back to red-green fiscal crisis? The dollar amounts are actually smaller with 138 million. It's still big. But the difference between the red-green fiscal crisis is the red-green fiscal crisis was a crisis created by the policymakers in Erie County government who knew that they were facing a fiscal crisis for years in a row, in which, as I like to say, they were on a gravy train that they knew was headed towards a brick wall. And at any time, the county executive then, the comptroller, didn't. They let the train hit the brick wall. That was then. Now, we had great financial success. We ended up with a nearly, in operating, when you take out the ECMC portion, a nearly $30 million, approximately $30 million surplus last year. After surplus after surplus. Hello, Assemblyman Burke, as he walks by. We've ended up every year in the black. We did not rely on fiscal gimmicks and tricks to end up every year in the black. We did it by sound budgeting and good numbers, such that our credit rating is the highest it's been in nearly 20 years, since at least before the red-green fiscal crisis. So while the dollar amount is huge, and I'm not going to deny that it's a significant amount, this is not like the red-green fiscal crisis, because this is not a crisis as a result of the elected officials, the policymakers, ignoring the warning signs. This is a crisis that resulted starting in late March as a result of the COVID-19 outbreak and the shutdown of businesses in our community. As I noted, Michael, we actually finished the first quarter of the year with a small surplus. In COVID-19 and the shutdowns that already started by the end of March. What we're facing now are significant cuts as a result, or revenue loss as a result of April and May, and what we're expecting for the remainder of the year. It's not as bad as it could have been, $220 million initial projection, but $138 million is nothing to sneeze at. It's huge. Anybody else, any other questions? I'm not exactly certain of time.
I couldn't hear the question.
When are they going to vote in the legislature? Just introduce yourself.
Hi, Ben Swannekamp, Deputy Budget Director. The legislature has 21 days to act on the proposal.
I had a question about road projects and other capital projects. Can you talk a little bit about that? You had previously said that some occasion road projects might be delayed, canceled. Just wondering what that is. And also, you have made it a priority to move forward things like Erie Net and design a new convention center. Where do things stand with that?
The question was with regards to capital projects, including our road projects, as well as proposals I've had in the past, like Erie Net and our convention center. The convention center, for the time being, is just put aside. That was never going to move forward unless we got state assistance. And right now, the state is facing a $6 billion deficit themselves. So for now, the convention center, well, let me backtrack. 2020 was going to be the year I was going to try to raise money for the convention center. That's just not happening this year. So I'm hopeful we'll be able to pick it up later in the year if things go well with regards to the federal government's investment in state and local governments. But right now, it's just put to the side. Erie Net, we're not moving forward with the particular portion of Erie Net that we anticipated to move forward this year. We actually had an RFP out on the streets. We got responses back, but we're not going to look at those until we know we have funds to do it. So right now, that has sort of been put on the side as well. Road and bridge projects, we are moving ahead with capital projects for money that was federal aid projects or borrowed previously. Like I was out in Orchard Park today, and they're doing work, and we'll be milling next week on McKinley Parkway, Abbott Road, Armor Duels Road. There's work that was being done on East and West Road in West Seneca, North and South Main Street in the town of Evans, Village of Angola. That's still moving forward. We have looked at money or projects that come out of the pay-as-you-go fund, our operating fund, and right now The vast majority of that normally would not start until late June, early July, and basically be July, August, and September. So those projects really haven't moved forward because they normally would not move forward. But the Department of Public Works does have multiple plans. The worst case scenario of which is there would be upwards of a 40% cut in some of the pay-as-you-go funding. So some of the mill and overlay projects, the cold cycle that we did last year that was very successful, we would have to cut some of those projects down, or the number of projects. But there's a number of, I've seen them, there's a number of spreadsheets in which it's a 40% cut, a 20% cut, or no cut. So the capital projects that are borrowed and the federal aid projects are moving forward as we speak. Some of those are ongoing right now. The pay-as-you-go projects, which would not normally start till later June, as well as July, August, September, those are still subject to how much money we have available to do that. The Department of Public Works knows that if it comes out of the operating budget, is subject to potential cutting if the federal government doesn't come up with aid. And they've come up with a proposal that I think addresses that.
The proposal to close the Building Center came from the Sheriff's Office, correct?
Yes. With the support of my administration. They talked to us about it. And we originally had, when we were talking to all the departments about a 13% cut, all the departments had higher cuts. After we told them that the number's not going to be 13%, they went back and they rewrote what they wanted, but they included that. And it does have the support of my administration. And I do believe that there are individuals at the Sheriff's Office who think that is a worthwhile effort for not only a financial concern, but some of the other concerns that we've dealt with through the holding center for many years. The holding center is a building. There would still be parts of it that would have to still maintain with regards to moving detainees, inmates out, depending on, I use detainees about individuals who are pre-trial, pre-conviction, and inmates, of course, for those that are convicted. But remember, there are individuals at our correctional facility, even our holding center, that are not county detainees, inmates. They're parole violators from the state and the like. So there are individuals in our facilities that are not controlled percent. I should say they're in our facility, but they're there because of agreements with New York State. So there's still things that would go back and forth, but the vast majority of the holding center, the pods, the cells that are existing, those would primarily close.
Once it gets approved by legislative, how long would it be before?
Well, the advantage of our plan is it's a rolling plan, move it out, so we don't have to implement it all at once. And that was a discussion that the chairwoman and I had. We don't want to do all these cuts July 1st, and then have the federal government pass a version of the HEROES Act that's united by everyone on July 15th. So then we've laid off people, we've done these drastic cuts, and then we end up calling people back. So the advantage of our plan is it's a rolling plan. It can be implemented by the budget office during the month. So there could be we'll adjust in July or June. We'll adjust in July, we'll adjust in August, we'll adjust in September as we go forward. That is something that I wanted to see, and my discussions with Chairwoman Baskin is she was very enthused about that plan, because none of us want to do a mass cut, have these tremendous amounts of impact, and then potentially bring the people back in 2 weeks anyway if the federal government comes up with the assistance.
When would you need to decide about, what trigger on layoffs?
Well, we'd have to start implementing this plan as of July. The layoffs, the vacancies would come first, but some of the layoffs would have to come fairly soon thereafter.
The whole process with the personnel letters and things.
Yeah, so like vacancy cuts would come first, just get them out. That comes up with savings. That must be almost 3 o'clock. I think we have to fix the clock on the old bell tower in County Hall because it's saying it's 3:52. It's 3? So it's 3 o'clock. At least the bells are working properly, if not the clock tower. So we'll work it. I'll talk to Tim Elling, our Deputy Commissioner of Buildings and Grounds, on that one. Yes. There is no curfew in Cheektowaga or any other else in the county, but I do believe there's a curfew in the city of Buffalo. That, not countywide. I have not implemented a curfew. The mayor declared a state of emergency himself and implemented a curfew in the city of Buffalo effective 8 o'clock. I live in the city of Buffalo. I've been in my home as of 8 o'clock every night. And I will say this, people are following it because as a lot of people know, I live on a heavily traveled road. And traffic has been much lighter after 8:30, I'd say. Much lighter than you normally would expect. And people are following it, and I think it's evident because last night there were no issues in Erie County of substance. There were 2 protests that were going on as it got close to 8 o'clock, the one downtown in front of City Hall and another one in Hamburg, and they both resolved peacefully. That's a good thing. I'm glad to hear it. The question was, have I briefed the comptroller on what we proposed? The answer is no. He should have received by now a copy of the proposal. And I'll say this with regards to the comptroller. He came out and said this was a 220 million plus deficit. We understood that there was a large deficit, but we were one of the things I didn't want to do was do a rush plan. We were in an emergency situation with COVID-19. And in the middle of this, we actually had Bob Keating, our budget director, have to go for emergency surgery. And he's home, healthy, thankfully. But if we had to rush through in 7 days, we would be in a much worse position than we are today because we would have proposed a slash and burn budget for 200 million plus that I'm very thankful the legislature, when I talked to them and said, I'm going to need more time. I'm going to use the emergency powers I have under the state of emergency during COVID-19, because our budget staff was working on COVID-19 issues, to delay it, to give me additional time. They were very amenable to that. At least some of the majority members of the legislature were. And as a result, we have a better plan. We have a more workable plan, a reasonable plan. It's still not great, but we would have had a slash and burn plan beforehand that would have forced the legislature to have acted by now. And as a result, we would be in a much worse position. We would be talking about many more layoffs. If you think about it, at 138 million, we had to designate $40 million towards cuts. At 220 million, doesn't take a genius to realize if you deduct 220 by 138, you're talking about $80 million more, or cuts we would have had to implement from our expenditure lines. That would have been horrible. Thanks, everyone.